any other of the many platforms. If you'd share this link, that'd be amazing. So you can find it at Austin Tech Live on YouTube. So if you want to tune in by that, we're sharing that on Facebook. If you're a member of Connections Networking Facebook page, we've already posted the link, so you can post that to your user groups and they can see this event live. So that would be super rad if you would do that for me. We want to share this with as many folks as possible. So thank you so much. I don't think my laptop is going to revive. Oh, look, I speak of the devil. Must have really let this thing drag down. This will help me not forget things here. All right. Glad to have Jonathan Mooney with us tonight, everybody. If you don't know who Jonathan is, he's on the front row. All right. How many of you here tonight, how many of you are in the medical space? So there's 6 major categories of special care. Who's in the medical space? Raise your hand way up high. Okay, so we got some med folks, therapy folks. Okay, good. Education, special education folks. Awesome. We've got a good showing of that tonight. Nutrition, yes, we got Lawrence Becker. He pretty much, you do everything, Lawrence. This is like not a fair question for you. Okay, family resources, nonprofits, respite programs, that sort of thing. Awesome. Thank you guys for coming. And my favorite, recreational resources. Do we have recreational resources anywhere in the house? No? The Y? I know we talked to them, Boys and Girls Club, so I don't see them yet. They may drag in earlier, or later. That's going to be really great. Okay, so welcome to the Pediatric Impact Tour. This is the first time that we have ever done an event in the evening like this. So I want you to do me a favor, give yourself a round of applause for coming tonight and showing up. And look, Lawrence, speak of the devil. Richard is here. We can start. He asked about you first thing. Is Richard coming? I'm like, probably. I just don't know when. So a lot of great things. We've been doing this for 10 years. And so the idea was we were sitting around saying, you know, we've been doing this for a decade. We started what we called the Connections Project a little over 10 years ago. Gloria, can you believe that? Gloria was there 10 years ago. Several of you were there 10 years ago, and we said, look, why aren't pediatric providers networking? Why don't they know each other? Why aren't we intelligently referring to our peer providers and keeping kids off waiting lists? And then kind of the third thing was, why don't we provide free information to families persistently over time? And so that started a project. And so I ended up doing a TED Talk about it. We have all this data around it, like what do we need to do to solve this problem? But the most important thing we do is what you're doing right now tonight, which is getting good people that are passionate about pediatrics in one room, getting them to talk to each other and learn from each other and connect to one another so that we can better serve our community. That is the magic, if you can believe it or not, that is the magic of what we do. And so you coming out tonight, you might not think that's a big deal. It's a really big deal to us. And I want to acknowledge real quick my leadership team that runs Connections Networking here in Austin, Texas. So leadership team, stand up, wave your hands. Tomas, you are not raising your hand. I see that. So there you go. And I got John Relic, my COO, is here tonight. He is rarely with me. We are usually very much apart, like he's going one place, I'm going another. But these folks that just raise their hands run monthly networking. We would love for you to come out, and it is free. Same as this event, which we think is important. We want to create free spaces for providers to network. If you haven't been to that group, you definitely should do it. Okay, so sponsors tonight. How do we pull off an event like this? And that is why I was waiting on my computer to fire up. So we're going to see if I can find the appropriate presentation, because I want to make sure we get all our sponsors here tonight. All right. PIT presentation. That stands for Pediatric Impact Tour, if you're wondering. Okay, wonderful. All right, so I want to thank Capital Factory. So this is a pretty nice facility, yeah? So CareStarter is very proud to be a Capital Factory company. We entered the accelerator last year, and they have been incredibly helpful. So last night was the first stop on the Pediatric Impact Tour in Dallas, Texas, and we were at Capital Factory in Dallas, and it was wonderful, and they even donated the beer for that event, which I thought was pretty amazing. And so they've been very good to us and allowed us to use this space. And what we talked about last night, and I'm more convinced of today, is we want to do this event, Pediatric Impact Tour, every single year. And if we do that, I just want to know if you will help me pack this room out. Is that possible? I know each one of you know many providers that should be here, and when you hear Jonathan, this is what happened last night, is people came together, they're like, this person's missing, and after Jonathan got through talking, people started coming up to me going, I'm going to call this person and this person and this person because I am so inspired, and that is the goal tonight. Connect to the person next to you and be inspired. And Capital Factory definitely helped us do that. Infinity Pharmacy, they have materials in the back. They are another tour sponsor, so they have helped us do this at all 4 stops. So last night was the first stop. Tonight is stop number 2. Tomorrow we'll be in San Antonio, so if you have San Antonio friends or peers, please invite them to that event. And then on December 3rd, we are going to be doing this in Houston, Texas. And so we are making a pretty big deal about it, but Affinity has helped us sponsor all 4 of those stops, and so we'd like to thank them. Nikki is not able to be here, I don't think. Is Nikki in the room tonight? During the presentation last night, her family had a wreck and her son went to the hospital, and so we kind of thought that she would not make tonight, hopefully tomorrow night, so definitely wish her well. But a huge thanks to them. They do customized pharmacy, and it is very, very awesome. If you've never toured their facility in Dallas, you definitely want to go do that. And then CareStarter, which is my company. So out of this crazy nonprofit project came CareStarter, and CareStarter automates and scales care management. So what we're doing is taking medical teams, medical facilities, children's hospitals, pediatric focused health plans, and most recently the military, go from touching about 1% of their patient interactions and delivering resources to overnight, when we launch our product, going from 1% to 100% of families, getting a care map that is customized around the child's age, diagnosis, and zip code. And then we follow them through what we call the predictive crisis model. And I want to show this real quick because this is what connections the project built. And this is what we want your help in. So out of the Pediatric Impact Tour, the nonprofit, the Texas nonprofit that has been around forever, it seems like, is now becoming the world's first industry association. And when I say that, pediatrics is 30 years behind senior care. We've never organized the industry. And because of that, we have this model right up here. So when we talk about pediatrics, we're talking about 5 major pods of care. And if you see just below these pods of care, there are significant delays starting at 12 to 14 months, directly out of NICU and maternal health, early childhood 12 to 14 months, education 2 to 3 years, transition 3 to 5 year delay, and independent living. And what we're doing right now is we're calling on providers to join us to build the first ever macro data set. We are living in pediatrics in what we call a data desert. And I'm going to give you a real quick example, and then I'm going to shut up about this, but I really want to share this with you because we want you to join this effort. We're missing macro data. So I'm going to give you a couple examples, and probably the most important one that we ran into recently is just kind of came to us as we're having this high-level discussion with a lot of important people, and somebody says to me, well, we've got data in pediatrics, we have CDC data, which is true. And CDC data says that 87% of kids are healthy. I can take 3 diagnoses, 3, and disprove that stat. 3. So when I say we're in a data desert, that's what I mean. And so a lot of people ask me, Lamarck, why can't we do better? Why don't legislators do better? Here's why. We don't have better data, so we're not making the right decisions. And so if you would be willing to join us in that effort, I want you to talk to myself or my team. John is in the back. Jillian will be here in a little bit. We'd love to connect with you and plug it in, and let's work together to improve macro data for pediatrics. Are you guys excited about that? I'm a nerd, so you got to kind of get excited about data, okay? That's just the way it goes. Okay, so Jonathan is here tonight. I'm going to introduce him. I met him, like I met most of you, at an event for pediatric special care. In fact, last week, I was at the Pentagon. You want to know why I was there? pediatric special care. Every place I go is for pediatric special care. And we met at the Marbridge conference here in Austin, and he was the keynote speaker. And when I heard him speak, I wrote so many notes that my hand cramped up because I don't write much anymore. And I was like, I got to meet this guy. And definitely did. I said, we got to do something together. And that's something you guys get to be a part of tonight. So thank you so much for coming. And I want you to thank the person next to you. So the person to the left to your right, just tell them thank you for a minute, will you? Yes, so I believe that the change that the world needs is sitting in this room. My favorite thing that I do every single week is to interact with providers who are just like me, overly passionate about pediatric special care. Jonathan is one of those folks. And I got to tell you, you're in for a treat. Jonathan, get up here, man. I love you. And he's got books, a brand new book coming out. You didn't really promo this much, but you should tonight. We got books in the back. He will sign your copy. You want a signed copy. If you buy a book and you can get him to sign it, you just don't get it, okay? So make sure he signs it. But he's going to come up and do an amazing job and share some pretty awesome stuff with you. So Jonathan, get up here, man. Thank you so much for coming.
Right on. Well, hey, everybody. How you all doing? My name is Jonathan Mooney, and I could not be any more honored and privileged to be here with you tonight. Now, before I do my thing, I got to give a big old shout out to the sponsors who put tonight on. Because let's be honest, putting on 4 events like this over the course of 4 days is a big old pain in the ass, right? And so we got to give all of those folks who put their money and their time behind this a big old round of applause. Can you all do that? Okay. Secondly, I want to thank you all, obviously, for the opportunity to be here and speak with you tonight. But more importantly, I want to thank you all for the work that you do. Because you all know more than anybody that individuals with atypical brains and bodies, folks with cognitive and physical disabilities, get the short end of the stick. You all know that building a more inclusive and just world is the social justice issue of the 21st century, and you all are the front lines of that important work. So like Lamarck asked you, I want you to look to your left and your right, want to look behind and in front of you, and I want you to give your colleagues, the fellow frontline men and women fighting for a world that works for not just some people, but all people, a big round of applause. Can you all do that? Okay. Right on. Okay, with all that said and done, let me just kind of get right to it. I have spent my entire professional life as an advocate for folks who learn and live differently. I've done that work for very personal reasons, because I learned and lived differently. And not only did I learn and live differently, I struggled tremendously because of those differences. I was the kid who had such a hard time sitting still in elementary school that I spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway, right? I was the kid in middle school who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut that I grew up on a first-name basis with Shirley, the receptionist in the principal's office, right? And I was the kid in high school who had such a hard time with reading, and specifically a torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of my high school experience hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. I didn't learn to read until I was 12. Couldn't read until I was 12. Growing up, I had every label you can imagine. I was called the dumb kid, I was called the bad kid, I was called the lazy kid, and then eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed with a continuum of language-based learning disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and others in 3rd grade. I was diagnosed with ADD, which I think we all know stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, in 4th grade. And I dropped out of school for about a year in 6th grade. That year when I left school, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety, with depression, and I had a plan for suicide. I spent about a year after leaving my public school in and out of a variety of different school settings. I went to alternative schools for a minute. I went to special education specific programs for a second. And then if I'm honest with y'all, I went to no school. I was at home trying to rebuild a sense of self, a sense of value as a human being to face down my adolescence. So y'all can probably imagine, by the time I got into my adolescence, middle school and beyond, there are all sorts of low expectations that surrounds me. Low expectations that too often surround folks with atypical brains and bodies. You know, I heard it all. I was told I'd most likely be a high school dropout by my father. I was told I'd never hold a job by a counselor. And I was told I'd most likely end up in jail or incarcerated by a teacher. So I was asked here tonight to in part talk about how I beat those odds and went on a very different journey than the one that was predicted for me. You know, opposed to being a high school dropout, as my dad said, I became a college graduate. I graduated from a place called Brown University, which you may or may not know is an Ivy League university, with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature, right? Opposed to being unemployed, you know, I ended up writing books. First book I wrote at the age of 21 as an undergraduate at Brown. And opposed to being an inmate, you know, I became an advocate. Somebody who has dedicated his entire life to making the world a better place for folks who get the short end of the stick. So I was asked here tonight to talk about that journey of change and transformation. I was asked here tonight to answer a question that may be in your mind when you hear about that journey of change and transformation. You know, I'm asked all the time by moms and dads, by educators, by students themselves, hey, Jonathan, how'd you do it, right? How could you go from a 6th grade dropout who couldn't read at 12 to an Ivy League English major, published author? What drugs did you take? And where can I buy some, all right? I know that's the question on y'all's mind, and that's the question that I want to answer. But not only do I want to share with you tonight my own personal journey, I also want to interrogate and challenge the subtext that is often underneath that question that I'm asked. Because when folks come to my story and say, hey man, how'd you do it? Really what they want to ask me, if they're being honest, is, hey Jonathan, how did you fix yourself? Because there's a deeply held cultural belief that different is deficient, and for folks with differences to go off and be okay in the world and thrive, they have to stop being different. And that has led to a medicalization and pathologizing of difference and a remediation model that looks to fix difference, make the square peg fit the round hole. But the reality is that's not my story. It's not a story of deficits and disorders. It's not a story of being fixed. It's a story of being empowered by the people on the front lines, people just like you. So I want to talk with you tonight about what constitutes that empowerment model. So whatever role you're in, whether you're in direct service, whether you're a part of an institution, whether you're a part of a social venture that's working to better the world for folks with differences, you can be advocates for empowerment for every person you meet. So when I think about empowerment, it means three things. Let me share these with you briefly. First and foremost, empowerment requires us to redefine who or what we call the problem. You know, for most of human history, normal has been good and right, and different is defective and deficient. And the problem is in the difference, right? You know, I know that personally. I remember when I was diagnosed, right, with ADD and dyslexia. And the school psychologist called me and my mom into her office to give us the test results. And it was obvious the moment me and my mom walked into that office that everybody in that room thought we were getting terrible, tragic news, right? You know, the lights were down low, There was jazz music playing in the background. There was a box of tissues on the table, right? Because we were there to mourn the death of my normality. Different is seen as deficient, and the problem is in the person. But the reality is the problem isn't in the person. The problem is in the way people with differences are treated in institutions that are built around the myth that we should all be the same. Let's take my experience with ADD as a good example of that paradigm shift. Let's take this thing that everyone calls a deficit of attention, right? Go to the academic conferences, read the research literature. It sounds like I got a problem in my brain. But the reality is this thing everyone called a problem was a difference in the truest sense of the word. A difference with challenges, don't get me wrong, but a difference with good things as well. You know, I'm not naive about the challenges that come with having my brain. I struggle with organization. I struggle with executive functioning. I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead, okay? Those are very real challenges, but do you know what goes hand in hand with those real challenges? A whole bunch of good things that we don't talk enough about. Y'all know that research shows that people with atypical attention spans are better problem solvers than the general population. Came across a research study recently that showed that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? Forget paying attention, you know, come get my cats, right? So it's a difference, right? With challenges, with weaknesses, and strengths all wrapped up together. It's not my problem, however. My problem isn't ADD. My problem is the school desk. How in God's name could a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you into my relationship with a school desk, and it is a fraught relationship, right? You know, this is my experience. First grade, 12th grade, Brown University, tonight, me in the front row, doesn't matter. I see that desk, I see that chair, and 5 seconds in the class, the foot starts bouncing. 10 seconds in the class, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds in the class, oh, I'm going to bust out the drums, right? 15 minutes in the class, it's all over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is shamed, is called a problem. Because we confuse or conflate being a good person with being a compliant person. And if you're not the compliant person who can be quiet and sit still and raise their hand, something's wrong with you. You know, I got that message at home. I'll never forget, I grew up in an old school Irish Catholic household. So every night at the dinner table with my dad, it was, Jonathan, stop it, stop it, stop it. What's wrong with you? And the same message happened in some of my classrooms. Not all of my classrooms, don't get me wrong, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in second grade named Mrs. C. I've had many, many gifted, brilliant teachers in my life who I will celebrate with you tonight. Mrs. C is not one of those, okay? My foot would be bouncing. She would stop class. She would point at me, and all the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what is your problem? We put the problem in the person. When the reality is the problem is a narrow learning environment where kids spend 75% of the day sitting still. And the problem is the social shame and stigma that comes from being called a problem. That's really the problem. You know, let me give you one of the best examples of that I've seen. I spent a lot of time talking with young folks. And back in the day, I gave a talk in Green Bay, Wisconsin to third graders. Walked in to give my presentation, and from the front of the room and the back of the room, I could see a set of boxes made out of bookshelves about 3 feet tall. So they had taken these bookshelves, made a box about this big. And in one of the boxes, I could see a head bouncing up and down. It was one of the third graders in the box jumping. Now, that's not a sight you see every day. So I turned to the teacher and I said, with all due respect, hey man, what's up with the box? You know, what's going on? And the guy looked at me with a straight face, not a hint of sarcasm, and he said, Jonathan, that's Jack. I said, you have a Jack in the Box? Are you kidding me? They put poor little Jack in the back of the room in a box. Hey, I don't gotta belabor this point. ADD ain't Jack's problem. The box is Jack's problem. Difference disabled by context and the way it's treated. And the same is true with my so-called learning disabilities, you know. Folks come to my story all the time and they say, hey man, it must really suck to be dyslexic and have a hard time with reading and writing. And the reality is, it doesn't. You know, it's a challenge, of course, right? And I'm not naive about the challenge. I struggle with reading, you know. I struggle with spelling. I confuse words that look alike. Who and how look the same to me. Horse and house look the same to me. When I went to college, I thought my university offered a class in orgasmic chemistry, okay? Imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class, you know? So come on, I got that, right? You know, those are very real challenges. But y'all know what goes hand in hand with those real challenges? A whole bunch of good things that we don't talk enough about. Do y'all know that 50%, hang out with this for a second, 50% of small businesses in America were founded by or are run by somebody with a language-based learning difference. That kid hiding in the bathroom, well, to escape reading out loud, is the next CEO in this country. So it's not my problem. It's a challenge, of course, but my problem was feeling stupid because I learned differently. That's my problem. And you know, that problem has an origin. And its origin is a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. You know, we narrowly define intelligence in our culture. We confuse or conflate being good at school with being smart. But y'all know those are different things now, don't you? Don't know about you, but some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, they didn't do school well, but guess what? They could rebuild the car engine from scratch. And that person is just as intelligent and just as valuable to the world as that person with a PhD. And the flip side is true. You know, some of the stupidest people I've ever met in my life have had PhDs, you know? Can't get to the supermarket, right? So we value one brain at the expense of all those other brains. And it leaves so many people out. And not only do we value a narrow definition of intelligence, we start to track kids on that. And if you don't have that school brain, and specifically at a young age, if you don't have the reading brain, you find yourself in the dumb group. Who remembers the dumb group? Anybody? Yeah, let me ask that question differently. Because the reality is we all went to schools that had the smart group and the stupid group. They didn't call it that. It wasn't malicious intentionally, but it was there, wasn't it? Who remembers reading groups? Anybody remember reading groups? Yeah. Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart group and which reading group was the dumb group? It wasn't hard to tell, right? You had the blackbirds over here, you have the bluebirds over here, and then over in the annexed trailer building, you got the sparrows, you know? Come on now, we ain't fooling anybody. Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, everybody knew that my group was the stupid group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, you know? And I was chilling out with C-Spot Run, and everybody knew that the Condors were the smart group because they were reading War and Peace, right? It ain't hard to tell. And the worst thing about it is, hey, guess what? Not only do I know that I'm in the dumb group, but who else knows I'm in the dumb group? Everybody else knows. Some of the worst memories of my life were going over to the other side of the room to pick up my little book, and let's be honest, C-Spot Run, not a bad book, right? Nice narrative structure, nice moral tale, but you don't want to be caught dead with Spot when you are 14 years old now, do you? Spot's going in the shirt, in the backpack, because as I walk by all the other kids, I'm going to hear it. I'm here, Jonathan, go back to your dumb reading group. Jonathan, go back to your stupid reading group. Jonathan, go back to your retarded reading group. A word which should be treated as the moral equivalent of a racial slur. That's the problem, right? Not dyslexia, but being made to feel dumb. Not ADD, but being made to feel crazy and bad. Not the difference, but the way the difference is treated. And that's true from my experience. That's true in the research I've read. And that's also true in the stories I've heard from a continuum of people with differences. I wrote this book back in the day called The Short Bus. The Short Bus is the type of school bus that takes kids with special needs to special education in some school districts, right? And I bought an old short school bus, and it's the short bus, and the normal kids go to school on the big bus. And I drove all around the United States, including stopping here in Austin, listening to the stories of people with cognitive and physical challenges to understand what helps them thrive in life. And one of the first people I ever met was this kid named Wilson. And Wilson had significant physical limitations. He breathed on a respirator. He had cerebral palsy. He had full-time health care. And in my interview with Wilson, I said, hey man, if you could change one thing, what would it be? If you had the magic wand and you could wave it, what would you change? And I expected him to say, you know what? I wish I didn't have CP. I wish I didn't have the respirator or the nurse or whatever. And Wilson looked right at me and he said, if I could change one thing, I would wish that people didn't stare at me. It's not the difference. It's the way the difference is treated. And that paradigm shifts matters. Because for too long, we've thought about our work with people who have physical and cognitive differences through the lens of charity or through the lens of pathology, putting the problem in the person to fix the person. But the future is to reject that and think about this as an issue of social justice. To understand that institutionalized ableism has led to systems that aren't built for all humans, but some humans. And have given many humans the message that if you can't fit this narrow definition of normal, you're broken, you're deficient, something is wrong with you. So reframing what we call the problem is the foundation of any act of empowerment and empowering folks with differences. But it's not the only thing, right? I told you there are 3 things I wanted to share with you that constitute empowerment. That's the first. The second is represented in my life by my mom. I want to give you a mental image of my mom, okay? Because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. My mom, not a tall woman. On a good day, in high heels, on her tippy toes, my mom is 4'11", right? She's a little Irish bulldog, And my mom, she's got this very funny, very high-pitched, squeaky voice, like Minnie Mouse. My mom totally sounds like Minnie Mouse. And my mom also curses like a truck driver, okay? So let me ask you a question. If you were a principal or a teacher, did you want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office? The answer to that question, if you are at all confused, is no, okay? But guess where my mom was every day when things were going wrong for her son? Oh, she was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? Because every dog in the neighborhood was running away, right? Only bats could hear her high-pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering. My mom understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. I needed somebody in my life to fight for and with me. And those are 2 very different things, That whole problem in the person mentality leads us down fixing the person. But when we reframe the problem and we understand the problems in the interaction between context and difference, it means we have to fight to change the context around people. My mom was an advocate for me. And we know in all of the research literature that folks with atypical brains and bodies who thrive in life, have decent jobs, are in deep relationship, have an advocate in their corner fighting for them, fighting for their rights to get services. And I know each and every one of you are fighting for that every day. And I know that Care Starter and the Connection Project is all about linking people with services that are their rights, by law. We also know that advocates fight for accommodations, changing not the person, but the environment around the person. And that is a civil right for everyone with a different brain and body. The right to be accommodated in their place of work or in their place of education. But last and not least, what mattered most in my life was my mom fighting for me to have an education and a life and a sense of self that wasn't just all about what I couldn't do. You know, if you have a hard time in school, if you have a cognitive or physical difference, you are relentlessly told what is wrong with you. You hear so much about what you can't do. You know, I heard I couldn't sit still, I couldn't read, I couldn't talk, I couldn't. But what about what I could do? We spend so much time talking about what's wrong, we lose sight of what is right. And that is deeply institutionalized in our education models for educators, in our processes and procedures. You know, when I was a kid, I had an IEP. Y'all know an IEP? For those of you that don't know it, it's called a Individualized Education Plan, IEP. Got to be honest about that thing. NSA, KGB, got nothing on the IEP, okay? They've been doing deep intel on me my whole life, flying unmanned drone missions over my house, and it is not good news in that file. Good friend of mine named Thomas Ayer, who is the former Secretary for Special Education at the U.S. Department of Education. He researches IEPs, 504 plans, response to intervention plans, all of those things that surround people with disabilities. And according to his research, for every one strength mentioned in those files, they mentioned upwards of 25 weaknesses. Imagine that being your life, you know? Imagine going to work all day long and having your colleagues talk about what's wrong with you, not what's right. Imagine going home and having your loved ones, your partner, talk about what's wrong with you, not what is right with you. It's a deficit model that is demoralizing, and it requires us to flip that script and not focus on what is wrong, but focus on what is right. You know, I'm here today because I had people in my life who did that. Specifically, a teacher in 3rd grade named Mr. R. Got to give a shout out to Mr. R. wherever he is, because I would not have survived if it wasn't for his commitment to find the good in every student in his class. He asked every kid every day, what are you good at? What are you good at? What are you good at? And he would ask me that, and you know what? I was in IEP land, so what would I say? I would say nothing. I'm not good at anything. And then one day he came to me and he said, Jonathan, I've been watching you and you are wrong about yourself. You are a good storyteller. Now, sometimes the stories you tell are inappropriate stories, but I don't care. You are such a good storyteller that you could be a writer. I was 9 years old. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. A writer, Mr. R? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I can't spell, man. And he looked right at me and he said, Jonathan, in my class, screw spelling. Screw spelling, man, yeah! For the first time in my life, somebody said, forget what you can't do and define yourself by what you can do. And each and every one of you have an opportunity to be a Mr. R in somebody's life. To find the good in a person who has only ever heard the bad. And that matters because everybody has an interest or a talent that they can turn into a pathway to a better life. You know, I really learned that from this kid named Juan. I'll tell you about Juan real quick. One of the things I do in LA is I work with young folks who have made some big mistakes in their life. And Juan was one of the first kids that I worked with in this way. And he was arrested when he was 13 for running a 50-person drug ring in Los Angeles. He was a serious narcotics dealer. He was in special education. He struggled with school, dyslexic, ADD, all of it. He dropped out of school. He joined the family business. He got arrested, went to jail, served his time, got out, came to my program, sat across from me at the interview, and said, look, I don't want to be that guy, but what am I supposed to do? You know, I am dumb, he said. I am not good at anything. And I thought about him, and I thought about where he came from, and I thought about Mr. R in my life, and I said to myself, now I have a chance to be a Mr. R for somebody else. And I looked at Juan, I said, Juan, 50-person drug ring? I said, you're an entrepreneur, brother. Now I was honest with Juan. I said, hey man, we got to get you a different product, you know? We got to get you some stocks or some hoodies to sell or something, man. But right there are skills and talents that you can use to build a better life. So Juan enrolled in a community college to study small business development. Juan studied graphic design because he was a gifted artist, misapplying his creativity onto the side of your building. And then he merged the two and created a small business that helped advertisers engage urban millennial youth. And he became the first in his family to graduate from college, and he became the first from his family to earn a legitimate living wage. Did we fix what was wrong with Juan? Nah. We scaled what was right. And every single human being deserves a life grounded in their strengths, their capacities, and their talents. And everybody deserves a Mr. R in their life. And my challenge to you is to be that for somebody. Okay, I want to conclude. And in concluding, I want to come back to the last thing that constitutes empowerment. You know, empowerment for folks with atypical brains and bodies is about reframing the problem. It's not in the person, but in the way the person is treated. It's a social justice issue. Empowerment is about flipping that deficit script, focusing on what is right, not just what is wrong. And last but not least, empowerment is about challenging this idea that normal is something we all should be. You know, that idea that there is a normal brain and body looms over all of us. And it tells us who have not normal brains and bodies that we are deficient and we are less valuable as human beings. And that is an existential wound. And healing that existential wound comes from rejecting this idea of normal. And I know that again in my own life, you know. So I want to end my time with you with a quick story about the day that I heard normal was the problem, not me. And this story comes from something that I co-founded when I was an undergraduate in college called Eye to Eye. Eye to Eye is a very simple nonprofit organization. It advocates for folks with learning and attentional differences, and it creates mentoring programs that takes young adults with learning differences and matches them with children who have similar experiences. It's about giving young folks hope. You're not alone. You're okay. There's hope for your future. So Eye to Eye is a national organization now in many states around the country. But when we started it, there was only 5 of us. 5 third graders, 5 Brown University students, all with neurodiversities in a special education room on the south side of Providence. And I'll be real with you, it was a fake it till you make it kind of moment, right? You know, we showed up there and we had no idea what the hell we were doing, you know? So we paired off and we shared our stories with a young person. And I was paired with a young man named Julio. I shared my story with him for about 10, 15 minutes, and then I took a break. And I walked around the room to observe, because it was my program. I had to make sure everything was going okay. So the first group that I observed was quite a sight to see. The third grader, his name is Philip. And Philip was a hurting kid. Philip had autism, ADD, and severe debilitating anxiety. Philip was so terrified of school that he would hide under the bed in the morning, beg his grandma not to make him go. Philip was so terrified at school that he had an anxiety tic where he would rub his left eyebrow raw. So when I met Philip, he had no left eyebrow. So he's a hurting kid. And then there's Philip's mentor. Philip's mentor is a Brown University student named Kent Roberts, good friend of mine to this day. So when I say this, I mean it as a compliment. Kent Roberts is a complete freak show, okay? He's got long hair down to here. He's got a long beard down to here. The dude totally looks like Jesus, right? I mean, get him some Birkenstocks and a staff, and you got JC in the flesh, okay? So they're quite a sight to see. You know, we got no eyebrow Philip, and we got Jesus-looking Kent, right? And I walk up to observe, and the moment I get within 5 feet of Kent and Philip, I hear Kent, who's usually very soft-spoken, screaming at the top of his lungs at Philip. And Philip is 9 years old. And Kent Roberts is screaming, Philip, if you learn one thing today, you have to learn that normal people suck, Philip. They suck. That's not what Jesus says, man. I mean, come on now. I am in a public elementary school, and I think the cops are coming next. So I go home that night, and I'll be honest. I call Kent Roberts on the phone, and I yell at him. You know, I think he's ruined this nonprofit I wanted to start. You know, there is no federal funding for an organization whose mission is to curse at children, okay? So I call him on the phone, and I am furious, and I yell at him for about 10 minutes. Why did you say that? How could you say that? What were you thinking saying that? And Kent doesn't say a word until the very end of the call. All he says is, it's true, and hangs up the phone, right? So I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, water under the bridge. No principal was present. No teacher heard it. Right under the rug. Nah. Next morning, I get a call from the principal of the Fox Point Elementary School, Principal Mary Brennan, and I am respectfully summoned to her office to discuss what transpired. And I drive to the office thinking of all the ways I can apologize for messing this kid up, and to confirm my fears, not only is it the principal, but it's also Philip's grandmother. Because Philip lives full-time with grandma. And if I've learned one thing in my brief life, it is do not mess with grandma, right? I walk into that office, and before I can sit down, Philip's grandmother, she stands up, she points at me, and she says, "What did you do to my grandson?" I said, "Nothing. It was that Kent guy, you know? Hey, Jesus or not, I threw Kent right under the grandma bus, you know? Never seen him before, never met him before. He appeared out of nowhere, you know?" She had tears in her eyes. She said, "For 3 years, my grandson's hid under the bed before school. For 3 years, from our home to school, he's been in tears begging me to turn around and go back. But today, the day after eye to eye, my grandson was up early, waiting in the car, ready to go to school. What did you do to my grandson?" I said, "Well, it was my good friend, Kent Roberts." And you know what? Hey, it wasn't me. It was Kent. For the first time in Philip's life, he heard that he wasn't broken. For maybe the first time in my life, you know, I felt that I wasn't broken. Because when you find yourself on the wrong side of normal, the message you get is you are a defective, broken human being. And Kent challenged that. Kent said, "You know what? You're not broken, Philip. That's broken. The myth that there is a normal that we all should be, that's the problem." And you know, Kent was right. You know, normal's like the horizon. You think you're getting closer to it, it just gets further and further away from you. The word normal did not enter the English language until the 1860s. It emerged within a cultural context of industrialization and standardization, when there was an imperative to make us more the same, opposed to celebrate and embrace what makes us different. And its time is up. Because the reality is, the only normal people are people you don't know very well. Because the moment you get to know another human being, it is their differences that constitute their humanity. As Jodie Foster said, normal is not something to aspire to, it's something to run away from. Difference is essential. Difference is true. Each of us is a singular permutation of the species. So you all are the front lines, in whatever capacity you find yourself in. You're the front lines of building a more inclusive world. You're the front lines of celebrating and empowering a group of people who have historically been demeaned and marginalized as not normal. And you are the front lines of making sure that we have a world where every single human being has a right to be different. Okay, thank you all so much for listening to me talk. So appreciate it. I know the bar's open, and rule number one as a public speaker is do not get in the way of an open bar. So I'm going to give you all my email address, different ways to be in touch with me. So if you want to continue the conversation, we can do that. I'll also be hanging out until we're all done here. So if you have a question, comment, whatever it may be, come up and say hello to me. I'll be hanging out, signing copies of my new book, which has a very subtle title called Normal Sucks. You're not supposed to say this if you're an author, but I'm going to say it. You don't even have to read the thing. You know what I mean? Just look at the title and it kind of says it all, right? So go check it out or not. It's cool. But come say hello to me. That's the most important thing. So if you want to continue the conversation, two ways. Come find me on the social stuff. You know, it's all the same thing, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. It's the Jonathan Mooney. The Jonathan Mooney. I'm always posting, pictures of me at the beach, living the dream. Not what I'm posting. Posting where I'm speaking, research, all those things that I care about, and hopefully supporting a vibrant community of people who care about this issue. So come join me there. Or hit me an email, old school, my name, Jonathan Mooney, as it's spelled up there. One word, at me, which is me.com. So Jonathan Mooney at me.com, the Jonathan Mooney on the social platforms. Come say hello to me. As Lamarck said, we're not only doing this here. We didn't only do it yesterday in Dallas. We're doing it tomorrow in San Antonio. So if you got colleagues, if you got loved ones, if you got somebody with a kid who you think could benefit from this is a free, open event. So spread the word. And then we're doing it in December in Houston. Where can people get information about those events, Lamar?
PediatricImpactTour.com.
PediatricImpactTour.com. And they're also on my website, which is just my name.com. Okay, bar's open. Before I go, thank you again to the sponsors of this amazing event, the facility, all the nonprofits that are building a pediatric impact community, and most importantly, my thank you to you for the work that you all do. Okay, have a wonderful evening. Come say hello.
All right. Did you guys like that? Okay. Will you come back next year? That's my question. Will you bring at least 3 people with you? Okay. We need to do this. We need more of it. You guys are inspiration, and always good to be in a room with folks like yourself. One quick housekeeping thing is if you parked in the garage that is I don't know where it is. It's here in this building. Anybody park in the garage? So it's not the cheapest garage. And so if you will see, the young lady in the back behind that massive robot, she will be able to help you with that. So it won't be free, but it will be much, much cheaper than it would be if you do not see her. You definitely want to see her. Buy Jonathan's book. And do me a favor and get to know some of the folks sitting in this room. We can hang out for a little bit, so definitely want you to do that. And thank you so much for coming. You guys are an inspiration to me, and I really appreciate you guys getting out tonight and standing up for pediatrics. And go team and network and have a good time.
And what